Unfortunately, it's not going to be quite that easy. There's always got to be a complication. There's always got to be a wrinkle in the plans. And this wrinkle comes in the form of Joab, who still has a grudge against Abner for killing his brother Asahel. Just then, David sent Abner away in peace. They had a meeting, they had a conference, and they had a feast, and David sent Abner away in peace. But Joab was not there for that. Joab was not present for that feast. And he has his own plans for Abner that do not match David's plans at all. Just then, David's men and Joab returned from a raid, and brought with them a great deal of plunder. But Abner was no longer with David in Hebron, because David had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the soldiers with him arrived, he was told that Abner, son of Ner, had come to the king, and that the king had sent him away, and that he had gone in peace. So Joab went to the king and said, "What have you done? Look, Abner came to you. Why did you let him go? Now he is gone. You know Abner, son of Ner. He came to deceive you, and observe your movements, and find out everything you are doing." Joab is a suspicious fellow. Joab is a bloodthirsty fellow, too. This is going to be a consistent character trait of him all throughout the rest of the story. Joab then left David and sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the well of Sirah, but David did not know it. Now, you would think David should have had a suspicion that Joab was planning something, but apparently he didn't. Now, when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the gateway, as though to speak with him privately. And there, to avenge the blood of his brother Asahel, Joab stabbed him in the stomach, and he died. Later, when David heard about this, he said, "I and my kingdom are forever innocent before the Lord concerning the blood of Abner, son of Ner. May his blood fall upon the head of Joab and upon all his father's house. May Joab's house," that be his brother-in-law's house, because Joab is the son of David's sister. So Joab's father would be David's sister's wife, in other words, David's brother-in-law. "May Joab's house never be without someone who has a running sore, or leprosy, or who leans on a crutch, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks food." So he is cursing Joab's house. He is saying, may they always have some sort of infirmity or frailty or weakness or problem bothering them forever. Joab and his brother Abishai murdered Abner because he had killed their brother Asahel in the battle of Gibeon. Now, this verse indicates that Abishai was a co-conspirator. Nothing in the previous sections indicate that he was even there, but apparently he was. Then David said to Joab and all the people with him, "Tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and walk in mourning in front of Abner." This is a funeral procession, obviously. King David himself walked behind the bier. So this is now the first time we've called him King David. They buried Abner in Hebron, and the king wept aloud at Abner's tomb. The people wept also. The king sang this lament for Abner. "Should Abner have died as the lawless die? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered." He was not a prisoner of war, in other words. He was not a legitimate. This was not a legitimate killing. This was not a wartime casualty. This was not a prisoner being captured in a war and brought back for execution. This was a murder. This was an illegitimate death. You fell as one falls before wicked men. And all the people wept over him again. So it's very important that everyone knows that David himself had nothing to do with this. Then they all came and urged David to eat something while it was still day. But David took an oath, saying, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun sets." And that'd be the end of the day. When the sun sets, it's the end of the day. All the people took note and were pleased. Indeed, everything the king did pleased them. So on that day, all the people and all Israel knew that the king had no part in the murder of Abner, son of Ner. Then the king said to his men, "Do you not realize that a prince and a great man has fallen in Israel this day? And today, though I am the anointed king, I am weak, and these sons of Zeruiah are too strong for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil deeds." And that will happen. That will eventually catch up to Joab. That's not going to happen for a long time. That's not going to happen until after David himself dies. Justice is not going to come for Joab for many, many years. We're not going to get to that until the days of Solomon, King Solomon, after David, in the beginning of the book of 1 Kings, after David's own death. But it will catch up to him eventually. Joab's misdeeds will catch up with him eventually. When Ishbosheth, son of Saul, heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost courage, and all Israel became alarmed. He was the strength of their forces, like he was the dominant force on their side of the battle, and with him gone, like they don't have anything. Now Saul's son had 2 men who were leaders of raiding bands. One was named Baanah, and the other Rechab. They were sons of Rimmon the Beerothite from the tribe of Benjamin. Beeroth is considered part of Benjamin because the people of Beeroth fled to Gittim and have lived there as aliens to this day. Jonathan, son of, this is a parenthesis. In our English formatting Bibles, this has a parenthesis around it. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. Probably Jonathan's only son. He was only 5, so Jonathan only had one son before he died. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became crippled. So somehow he fell and injured both of his legs permanently as they fled. His name was Mephibosheth. Now Rechab and Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, set out for the house of Ishbosheth, and they arrived there in the heat of the day while he was taking his noonday rest, his nap, in other words. They went into the inner part of the house as if to get some wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and his brother Baanah slipped away. They had gone into the house while he was lying on the bed in his bedroom, taking a nap, in other words. After they stabbed him and killed him, they cut off his head. Taking it with them, they traveled all night by way of the Arabah. They brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron and said to the king, "Here is the head of Ishbosheth, son of Saul, your enemy, who tried to take your life. This day the Lord has avenged my lord the king against Saul and his offspring." Now, we already read earlier in chapter 1 of this book what David does to people who claim to have killed Saul or his men. Like, David is not going to honor these guys like they expect to be honored. That didn't happen in the first chapter with the Amalekite messenger, and it's not going to happen here. And it didn't happen even with Joab, who killed Abner. Now, he didn't kill Joab in retaliation for it. He will eventually tell his son Solomon to do that later on. But he is not going to reward people for killing his enemies, even though they're doing it because they think he's going to reward them. David answered Rechab and his brother Baanah, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, excuse me, "As surely as the Lord lives, who has delivered me out of all trouble, when a man told me Saul is dead, and thought he was bringing good news, I seized him and put him to death in Ziklag. That was the reward I gave him for his news. How much more, when wicked men have killed an innocent man in his own house and on his own bed, should I not now demand his blood from your hand and rid the earth of you?" The Amalekite in chapter 1 hadn't even killed Saul. He was just taking credit for it. These guys actually killed Ishbosheth, and they have his head in their hands. So David gave an order to his men, and they killed them. They cut off their hands and feet and hung the bodies by the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried it in Abner's tomb at Hebron. Oops. What did I just do? Okay. I got confused there. All the tribes of Israel came to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.'" When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, the king made a compact with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. So he was anointed by Samuel back in 1 Samuel 16. In 2 Samuel 2, verse 4, he was anointed king over the house of Judah. And now, at long last, he has been anointed king over all of Israel. David was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. And in Jerusalem, he reigned over all Israel and Judah 33 years. So all that stuff you read about him in 1 Samuel took place while he was in his 20s. Maybe started out when he was in his late teens, possibly, when you first saw him. But he was a young man in his 20s during all that stuff in 1 Samuel. The king and his men marched to Jerusalem to attack the Jebusites who lived there. The Jebusites said to David, "You will not get in here. Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." They thought, "David cannot get in here." Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, the city of David. On that day, David said, "Anyone who conquers the Jebusites," this is a tricky one, "will have to use the water shaft, or according to the footnote, scaling hooks, to reach those lame and blind who are David's enemies, or hated by David. That is why they say the blind and lame will not enter the place." So he's taking their insult and putting it back on them, the Jebusites. David then took up residence in the fortress and called it the City of David. He built up the area around it from the supporting terraces inward, and he became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him. So Israel finally has Jerusalem. Israel finally has a capital. They first came into the land about 400 and plus years earlier. They came into the land. They left Egypt in 446 BC. They came into the land, and starting in 1406 BC. The conquest took about 5 years, so they got there about 1400 BC. David is now king sometime in the later 1000s BC, so about 400 years later. It took him about 400 years to finally capture Jerusalem and have a national capital. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers. Tyre is a city on the northern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, the northwestern coast of Israel, on the Mediterranean Sea. We're going to be reading a lot about Tyre in the future. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, along with cedar logs and carpenters and stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. And David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people, Israel. After he left Hebron, David took more concubines and wives in Jerusalem. He already had a bunch. He had Michal, for one, who he never had a kid with. But he also has Ahinoam of Jezreel, Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel, Maacah, daughter of Talmai, king of Jasher, Haggith, Abital, and Eglon. He already has 7 wives and a son with each of them, except for Michal. Now he's going to have even more. After he left Hebron, David took more concubines and wives in Jerusalem, and more sons and daughters were born to him. These are the names of the children born to him there: Shammua, Shobab, Nathan, Solomon, Ibhar, Elishua, Nepheg, Japhia, Elishama, Eliada, and Eliphalet. It says children. It doesn't specifically say sons. So some of those names, I can't tell the difference, okay? Solomon's important. We'll read about him a lot later. I don't know how many of those names are girl names. I mean, it says children, not just sons. So maybe These are the names of some of his daughters too. I don't know. I can't tell the difference. So anyway, David is now king of Israel. So let's go back now to the First Chronicles 11 and read about the Chronicles account of David's kingship. First Chronicles completely skips the civil war with Ishbosheth. We're just going to skip all that which we read in 2 Samuel and get right down to David being king. All Israel came together to David at Hebron and said, "We are your own flesh and blood. In the past, even while Saul was king, you were the one who led Israel on their military campaigns. And the Lord your God said to you, 'You will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become their ruler.'" When all the elders of Israel had come to King David at Hebron, he made a compact with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel, as the Lord had promised through Samuel. David and all the Israelites marched to Jerusalem, that is, Jebus. The Jebusites who lived there said to David, "You will not get in here." Nevertheless, David captured the fortress of Zion, the city of David. David had said, "Whoever leads the attack on the Jebusites will become commander-in-chief." That's a little bit different from the 2 Samuel account. 2 Samuel doesn't give us that piece of information. Joab, son of Zeruiah, went up first, and so he received the command. So David can't kill him now. We want to get rid of him because of his crime against Abner, but he's commander-in-chief, so we really can't do much about him right now. David then took up residence in the fortress, and so it was called the City of David. He built up the city around it, from the supporting terraces to the surrounding wall, while Joab restored the rest of the city. And David became more and more powerful, because the Lord Almighty was with him. So David is now king over Israel. He has finally, at last, been established as king over all of Israel. And he is going to stabilize the kingdom and establish a dynasty that will last all the way down to the Messiah, to the Christ. We're going to read about that a little bit later. The entire rest of the Old Testament is going to be a story of the line of David and their kings, basically. I read a little bit out of First Chronicles there. We're going to be going back and forth between 2 Samuel and First Chronicles a lot. First, Samuel and Kings provide information on the kings of Israel. We go from the days of the judges with Eli, and then Samuel himself being a judge, and then transitioning into the monarchy with Saul and then David. 2 Samuel is going to be all about David. And then 1 Kings and 2 Kings are going to be about the kings all the way up until the kingship falls, finally, in centuries to come. Chronicles is a recap of all of this. Chronicles is written afterwards and is written by someone who is telling the same story as told in Samuel and Kings, but with a slightly different purpose. So some of the information is going to be the same. Some of the information is going to be new. We're going to read sections of Chronicles that aren't in Samuel or Kings. Some of the information from Samuel and Kings is not going to be mentioned. Like the chronicler just completely skips the civil war with Saul's remaining loyalists. And he'll skip a lot of other stuff like that as well. And he'll include some things that the writer of Samuel and Kings did not. Like we're going to read a lot about, later on at the end of 1 Chronicles, we're going to read a lot about David getting ready to build his temple, which 2 Samuel doesn't really go into. So they're written by different people at different times, different purposes. Even when the information is the same, there might be a little bit of a wording change in there to indicate a slightly different focus. Now, First Chronicles begins, the first 9 chapters of it have this incredibly long genealogy, which just goes on and on and on and on and on. And it might very well be the most difficult section of the entire Bible for us today to read through, especially out loud. Even the stuff in Exodus, when it came to the information and the instructions for building the tabernacle, I think, are more exciting than those genealogies in First Chronicles. Because that stuff really is dry, and to us today, not particularly meaningful. It's nice to have it in there, nice to see the record of, the kings and the priests, and essentially that's what it is a record of genealogy of the kings and the priests, and then we can trace that down into the New Testament genealogy of Jesus, going back, connecting him back to the kings, connecting to David, which goes back to Abraham. It's important for that reason, absolutely important for that reason. But man, oh man, it is tough reading. And the chronicler, to do justice to the Chronicles and explaining the Chronicles, I'm not going to be able to do it by including it in the last few minutes of a long video after I've got done reading for an hour and a half. So I will talk a little bit more fully about the Chronicles probably next time, so that we really have a grasp of what the Chronicles are and how they differ from Samuel and Kings. But I am going to be going back and forth now as we get into the sections of material that cover the same thing, David and the rest of the Kings. I'm going to be going back and forth between 2 Samuel and the Kings and Chronicles, and talking about the contrast between the way these two accounts differ, how they're the same and how they differ. And this is what happens in the Gospels too. The Gospels have the same thing. 4 Gospels all talking about the same thing, but telling the story in different ways. And we see that already here in the Old Testament with the accounts of these Kings and Chronicles. So we need to get used to this idea. We need to get used to this idea of reading the same story a couple different times from different perspectives and for different purposes. So I will be talking about that more fully next time. But I did want to mention here that we are entering the phase now where we're going to be skipping back and forth a lot between these two different accounts of the same stories.